Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories, the annual company dinner. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said it was just another one of those obligations you dress up for, make small talk through, and mostly try to forget by the next morning. My husband, Tom, is a senior engineer at Atherton Solutions, and his boss, Mr. Albright, or Richard, as he insisted we call him during these less formal events, was always a bit of an enigma. Polite, certainly. Professional, absolutely. But warm? Not the word I would have chosen. He had this air about him, a sort of refined distance that kept everyone at a respectful arm's length. Tom admired him greatly, always spoke of his fairness and sharp intellect, but even for Tom, Richard Albright was more of a respected commander than a friendly confidant. I'd met him a handful of times over the 10 years Tom had been with the company. Each encounter was perfectly pleasant, a firm handshake, a polite inquiry about my well-being, and then he'd smoothly move on. So, you see, I wasn't expecting much beyond the usual lukewarm chicken and polite smiles. This year, the dinner was held at a new place downtown, the Gilded Grape, a restaurant that was trying very hard to live up to its name with an abundance of gold-trimmed decor and velvet upholstery. It was dimly lit, which I usually appreciate for its forgiving nature, but tonight it seemed to add to the slight stuffiness of the atmosphere. Tom was a little antsy. There were whispers of a big new project, and he was hoping for some sign, any sign, that he was in the running to lead it. He kept smoothing down his tie and glancing towards the head table where Richard was seated with some of the other senior partners. I squeezed his hand. "Relax, honey. You've got this. Just be yourself." He gave me a grateful, if still nervous, smile. The first hour was standard fare, mingling, a bit of forced laughter here and there. I found myself chatting with Martha, whose husband worked in accounting. We mostly talked about our respective gardens and the unpredictable spring weather we'd been having. The wine was flowing pretty freely, and I noticed Richard Albright was not immune. He was usually so controlled, nursing a single glass of red for most of the evening. But tonight, his laughter seemed a decibel louder, his gestures a tad more expansive. He was still charming, of course, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, but there was a loosening around his eyes, a slight flush to his cheeks. Tom, bless his heart, was so focused on trying to catch Richard's eye for a meaningful nod that he barely touched his own wine. As the main course was cleared, the speeches began. The CEO, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, droned on for a good 20 minutes about profit margins and synergy. My attention started to drift. I was watching the way the low light caught the crystal of the chandeliers, creating little rainbows on the white tablecloths. Then it was Richard's turn to speak. He was the COO, second in command, and usually his speeches were concise, motivating, and to the point. Tonight, he started off that way. He thanked everyone for their hard work, mentioned a few key successes of the past year. But then, something shifted. He paused, looked out over the room, and his gaze seemed a little unfocused. He took a rather large sip of water, though I suspected his water glass might have been topped up with something stronger earlier. "You know," he began, his voice a little huskier than usual, "we spend so much of our lives chasing success, chasing deadlines, chasing the next thing." He chuckled, a dry, almost melancholic sound. "And sometimes we forget what we're really here for." There was a slight murmur in the room. This was definitely off-script for Richard Albright. Tom looked like he'd swallowed his fork. I, on the other hand, found myself leaning in. There was a vulnerability in his tone I'd never heard before. He wasn't looking at his notes anymore. He seemed to be looking right through us, or perhaps into some distant memory. "My father," he said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. He worked his fingers to the bone, built a small business from nothing. And he always told me, "Richard, it's not about the money you make, it's about the lives you touch." He paused again, and this time the silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. I glanced at Tom. His jaw was practically on the table. Richard took another sip of what was definitely not just water. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. He wasn't slurring his words, not exactly, but there was a distinct lack of his usual crisp enunciation. He seemed human, flawed even. "We build these empires," he gestured vaguely around the room, "these careers. But what about the connections? The real connections?" His eyes scanned the tables, and for a fleeting moment, they met mine. It wasn't a polite, cursory glance this time. It was searching, almost pleading. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, a surprising wave of empathy for this man I barely knew, this powerful figure who suddenly seemed so adrift. He cleared his throat. "Anyway," he said, a hint of his usual composure returning, though his eyes still held that softened, vulnerable look. "Thank you for everything." He raised his glass. "To all of you." The applause was a little hesitant at first, then swelled, perhaps out of relief, perhaps out of genuine appreciation for this unexpected glimpse behind the curtain. Tom was clapping mechanically, a bewildered expression on his face. I found myself clapping too, but my mind was racing. This wasn't the Richard Albright I thought I knew. Not even close. The evening, I sensed, was far from over. And that feeling, that subtle tension that had been thrumming beneath the surface, suddenly felt a lot less subtle. The rest of the formal proceedings wrapped up fairly quickly after Richard's rather unconventional speech. Dessert was served, a chocolate lava cake that was surprisingly good, and then people started to mingle more freely, the atmosphere definitely looser than before. Tom was immediately cornered by a couple of his colleagues, dissecting Richard's words, speculating whether it meant a change in company culture or if he'd just had one too many. I excused myself, needing a bit of air, or perhaps just a moment to process. The main dining room was becoming a bit too loud, the scent of perfume and lingering food a little overwhelming. I spotted a small, discreet door near the back that seemed to lead to an outdoor patio. Pushing it open, I stepped out into the cool night air. It was a small, enclosed space, thankfully empty, with a few wrought iron tables and chairs, and some potted plants that looked a little sad under the dim glow of a wall-mounted lantern. I leaned against the brick wall, taking a deep breath. The city's sounds were muffled here, a distant hum rather than an intrusion. I replayed Richard's speech in my mind. "It's not about the money you make, it's about the lives you touch." It wasn't a revolutionary sentiment, but coming from him, delivered with that raw edge of emotion, it felt profound. I wondered what had brought on this sudden introspection. Was it just the alcohol, or was there something more? I thought about Tom, so dedicated, so hardworking, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. We had a good life, a comfortable life, but were we truly touching lives? Were we making the connections Richard had spoken of so wistfully? The door creaked open behind me, and I turned, half expecting to see Tom. But it wasn't Tom. It was Richard Albright. He looked a little surprised to see me there, and for a moment I thought he might retreat. But then he gave a small, almost shy smile. "Oh, hello again," he said. His voice was softer now, without the microphone and the pressure of the room. "Sarah, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes." "And you're Richard." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. So I am. At least, when I'm not Mr. Albright. He walked over to the railing, looking out at the sliver of night sky visible between the tall buildings. Needed a bit of quiet, he murmured, more to himself than to me. It got a little intense in there. I couldn't help but smile. Your speech was memorable. He turned to me, a self-deprecating look on his face. Memorable? Or mortifying? My apologies if I overshared. The wine, you know, he gestured vaguely. It wasn't inappropriate, Richard, I said gently. I think it resonated with a lot of people. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and that searching expression I'd seen earlier was back. Do you think so? He asked, his voice earnest.
Ido I affirmed.
Sometimes it's good to be reminded of what's truly important. He leaned against the railing, his frame silhouetted against the faint city glow. He was silent for a long moment, and I didn't rush to fill the quiet. There was a strange sense of ease between us, a comfortable silence that I wouldn't have thought possible with my husband's formidable boss. My father passed away 6 months ago, he said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear. I haven't really talked about it much. My heart went out to him. I'm so sorry for your loss, Richard, I said softly. He nodded, his gaze still fixed on some distant point. Thank you. He was a good man. A simple man in many ways. He ran a hardware store. Knew everyone in town. And they knew him. He wasn't wealthy, not by most standards. But he was rich in ways I'm only just beginning to understand. He turned his head slightly, looking at me. The dim light caught the moisture in his eyes. I've built this career, this life, and it's impressive on paper. But I find myself wondering, have I touched any lives the way he did? Have I made any real connections? His voice was filled with a raw honesty that was utterly disarming. This wasn't just the wine talking anymore. This was something deeper, something he'd clearly been wrestling with. And for some reason, he was sharing it with me, the wife of one of his employees, a near stranger. The unexpectedness of it all was dizzying, yet strangely right. The air on the patio seemed charged with unspoken emotions, with the weight of his confession and the surprising intimacy of the moment. I had a feeling that this conversation was about to change a lot more than just my perception of Richard Albright. Richard sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his unspoken grief and recent revelations. It's funny, isn't it? He continued, his voice still low and reflective. You strive for certain things your whole life. A title, a certain income, the respect of your peers. And then you get there and you look around, and you realize the landscape isn't quite what you imagined from afar. He pushed himself off the railing and took a couple of steps closer, not in an invasive way, but as if seeking a bit more connection in the quiet of the patio. The scent of his cologne, something subtle and woodsy, mingled with the cool night air. Your husband, Tom, he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming a little warmer. He's a good man, Sarah. A very good man. Loyal, incredibly bright. He reminds me a bit of myself 20 years ago. Full of ambition, eager to prove himself. I smiled. He thinks the world of you, Richard. Though I think your speech tonight might have sent him into a bit of a tailspin. Richard chuckled, a genuine, unburdened sound this time. Oh, I imagine it did. It probably sent half the company into a tailspin. My CFO will likely schedule an emergency psychological evaluation for me tomorrow morning. I laughed with him, the tension of the moment easing, replaced by a surprising camaraderie. Well, for what it's worth, I said, I think many people find themselves asking those same questions, regardless of their job title or their bank balance. What's it all for? What's truly meaningful? He looked at me intently, his gaze direct and, for the first time, devoid of that professional shield he usually wore. "And what do you think, Sarah? What's truly meaningful for you?" The question was personal, direct, and completely unexpected. I hadn't anticipated being on the receiving end of such a profound inquiry from him. I paused, gathering my thoughts. For me, I began slowly. It's the small things, I suppose. The everyday connections. A good conversation like this one, surprisingly enough. I gave a small smile. It's knowing my family is happy and healthy. It's watching my garden grow. It's feeling like I've made a positive difference, however small, in someone's day. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Simple, yet profound, he mused. My wife, Eleanor, she used to say things like that. She was always much better at appreciating the present moment than I ever was. There was a softness in his voice when he mentioned his wife, a hint of wistfulness. I knew, vaguely, that he was married, but he rarely spoke of his personal life at company functions. "Is she?" I started to ask, then hesitated, not wanting to pry if it was a painful subject. "She's here," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "In spirit, anyway. She's at a wellness retreat in Arizona. Finding her zen, as she calls it." He chuckled. "She's been telling me for years I need to slow down, to find my own zen. Maybe that's what tonight was about. A rather public, wine-fueled attempt at finding my zen. Perhaps zen isn't always found in quiet meditation," I suggested. "Perhaps sometimes it's found in admitting you don't have all the answers, even to a room full of people who expect you to." He looked at me, a spark of something akin to gratitude in his eyes. "You're very perceptive, Sarah." He paused, then said, "Tom is lucky to have you." The compliment was simple, direct, and it warmed me more than I would have expected. "I'm lucky to have him, too," I replied sincerely. "He's a good man, as you said. He works so hard, sometimes I worry he doesn't see how much he's already achieved, how much he already has." Richard's expression grew more serious. "That new project," he said, "the one everyone's been whispering about. The Phoenix account." My breath caught. This was the project Tom was so anxious about. "Tom is more than capable of leading it," Richard continued. "He has the skills, the vision. But I've hesitated." My heart sank a little. Was this leading to a disappointment for Tom? "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Richard looked out at the dark city skyline again. "Because leading that project will demand even more of him. More hours, more stress. And watching him tonight, so wound up, so focused on my approval, perhaps, I wondered if I'd be doing him a disservice. If I'd be pushing him further down that path I was just lamenting, the path of chasing without connecting." This was an astonishing admission. His concern wasn't about Tom's capability, but about his well-being, about the very things he'd spoken of in his speech. The level of empathy, of genuine consideration for his employee's life beyond the office walls, was something I had never associated with the stern Mr. Albright. It was deeply moving. "He wants it, Richard," I said softly. "He wants the challenge. And yes, it will be demanding. But Tom is also someone who thrives when he feels he's making a real contribution, when he's building something. Maybe this project, despite the demands, could also be a source of connection for him, with his team, with the work itself." Richard turned back to me, considering my words. "You think so?" "I do," I said. "And he needs to know that you see his potential, not just his capacity for hard work. Knowing you believe in him, truly believe in him, that would mean more than the project itself, I think." There was a long silence. The only sounds were the distant city hum and the faint clinking of glasses from inside the restaurant. Richard's expression was thoughtful, his gaze fixed on me. It felt like a pivotal moment, not just for Tom's career, but for my understanding of this complex man. The alcohol had clearly lowered his inhibitions, but what was emerging was not a sloppy, embarrassing drunk, but a man of deep feeling and unexpected integrity. The emotional connection that was forming between us on that little patio felt incredibly real, incredibly significant. It was built on a shared moment of vulnerability, his and then, in a way, mine as I spoke of Tom and my own values. It was based on mutual respect that had blossomed in the span of a mere hour. Richard let out a slow breath, a small smile playing on his lips. "You argue your case well, Sarah. Perhaps you should have been a lawyer." I smiled back. Perhaps. But I'm content being a gardener and a part-time worrier about my husband. His smile widened. "Well, your insights tonight, they've been more valuable than any board meeting I've attended this year." He looked at his watch. "It's getting late. And I suspect your husband might be wondering if I've abducted you. And my CFO is probably drafting my resignation letter," I quipped. He chuckled. "Touché. But before we go back in, I want you to know, I've heard you. About Tom. About everything." He met my gaze, his eyes clear and sincere.
Thank you, Sarah.
"For the conversation. For the clarity." "Thank you, Richard," I replied, meaning it. "For sharing. It was an honor, truly." He offered his arm, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly natural in the context of our conversation. "Shall we?" As we walked back towards the door, the sounds of the party growing louder, I felt a profound shift within me. My perception of Richard Albright had been completely overturned. The distant, formidable boss had revealed himself to be a man of depth, wrestling with universal questions, capable of great empathy and unexpected warmth. And in that process, I felt I'd discovered something about myself too, a capacity for connection in the most unexpected of circumstances, and perhaps a new appreciation for the quiet complexities of the people we think we know. When we re-entered the main dining room, the party was indeed winding down. Tom spotted us immediately, his face a mixture of relief and utter bewilderment. He rushed over. "Sarah, there you are, Mr. Albright. We were wondering." Richard clapped Tom warmly on the shoulder, a gesture so out of character that Tom visibly startled. "Just stealing your lovely wife for a moment of fresh air and philosophical debate, Tom," Richard said, his voice carrying a newfound lightness. "Sarah has been imparting some much-needed wisdom." Tom looked from Richard to me, his eyes wide. I just gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Actually, Tom," Richard continued, turning his full attention to my husband, "I'm glad I ran into you. I've made my decision about the Phoenix account." Tom straightened up, his expression instantly serious, tinged with apprehension. My own heart did a little flip. This was it. "I want you to lead it," Richard said, his voice firm and clear. Tom's jaw literally dropped. He stared at Richard, speechless for a moment. "Sir? You do.
Ido Richard affirmed.
You have the talent, Tom. But more importantly, I trust your judgment and your integrity. I know you'll build a great team, and you'll do it the right way. Just promise me one thing." "Anything, sir," Tom stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't lose sight of the connections, Tom," Richard said, his gaze steady. "The ones at work, yes, but more importantly, the ones at home. The ones that truly matter." He glanced at me, a subtle acknowledgement passing between us. Tom looked at me, then back at Richard, a dawning understanding in his eyes. He seemed to grasp that something more than just a job offer had transpired. "I understand, sir. I promise." A huge smile broke out on his face, a smile of pure joy and relief. "Thank you, Mr. Albright. Thank you." "Richard, Tom. Please," he corrected gently. "And you've earned it." Several colleagues nearby had overheard, and a small ripple of congratulations went through the remaining crowd. Tom was beaming, shaking Richard's hand vigorously. I felt a swell of pride for Tom and an immense gratitude towards Richard for his thoughtful, human approach. Later that night, as Tom and I drove home, he was still buzzing. "I can't believe it, Sarah. The Phoenix account. And did you hear what he said? About connections? It was like he was a different person tonight." I smiled, looking out at the passing city lights. "People are often more complex than we give them credit for, honey." "But what were you two talking about out on the patio for so long?" he asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. He seemed changed, even before he told me about the project. I thought for a moment how to explain the unexpected depth of the conversation, the shared vulnerability, the surprising emotional resonance. "We talked about his father," I said softly, "and about what's truly important in life. He's been going through a lot, I think." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Wow," he said finally. "I had no idea. I just always saw him as the boss."
He's more than that, Tom, I said.
"We all are." The weeks that followed were busy. Tom threw himself into the Phoenix account with renewed vigor, but I noticed a change in him too. He seemed more present when he was home, more mindful of carving out time for us, for himself. He talked more about his team, not just the deadlines. It was as if Richard's words, and perhaps the story of our patio conversation, which I eventually shared with him in more detail, had genuinely resonated. As for Richard, things at Atherton Solutions didn't transform overnight into some sort of utopian commune of shared feelings. He was still a sharp, demanding leader, but there was a subtle shift. A little more openness in meetings, a few more inquiries about people's lives beyond their work. He even started a small company initiative to support local charities, something directly inspired, he later told me during a brief, chance encounter at a coffee shop, by further reflections on his father's legacy and our conversation. For me, that evening at the Gilded Grape became a quiet touchstone. It was a reminder that profound connections can happen in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected people. It taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a bridge. My husband's boss, after one too many drinks, hadn't done anything scandalous or shocking in the way a tabloid headline might suggest. Instead, he dared to be human, to be honest. And in doing so, he'd opened a door for a connection that, in its own quiet way, was deeply transformative. It changed my perception of him. It subtly reshaped Tom's career path and his perspective, and it left me with a renewed appreciation for the hidden depths within us all, waiting for the right moment, perhaps lubricated by a little too much wine and a quiet patio, to be revealed. It was a lesson in mutual respect, in personal discovery, and in the quiet power of a truly honest conversation. And that, I believe, is something worth remembering, something far more valuable than any gilded surrounding or meticulously crafted corporate image. It was a reminder that sometimes, when the carefully constructed facades we all wear begin to crack, what's revealed underneath is something surprisingly, beautifully real. And that night, I saw the real Richard Albright, and in turn, I think he saw a bit of the real me. And that, you won't believe, made all the difference.